Let us now revisit the solution concept for extensive form games. And let's start by doing it let's start by looking at the following example. In this game, there are a number of Nash equilibria, and here is one of them. BH, CE. What is BH? Player 1 goes down here and down here, whereas player 2 goes down here and down here. Under this strategy profile, of course, the outcome of the game is this one, and the payoff to both players is 5. Let's first convince ourselves that this is indeed a Nash equilibrium. So let's hold players 1 strategy fixed and see if player 2 can profitably deviate from their current response. Well, what can they do? They can say, here I will, instead of going C, I would go D. They could say that, but that wouldn't impact the outcome at all, given that player 2 is going down B, and so that's not a profitable deviation, wouldn't change their payoff, the payoff to player 2. And the other thing they could do is say, I'm going to go down this way, but that would in fact worsen their payoff, because they would end up here with a payoff of 0 rather than the 5 they're getting. So player 2 cannot profitably deviate from their current strategy. What about player 1? Can they profitably deviate? Well, what could they do? They could say, okay, rather than go B, I'll go A. But then they will get a payoff of 3 rather than the 5 they're getting. That's not profitable. And they could also say, I'm going to go down G over here. But given that player 2 is going down E, that wouldn't matter. They would in any case end up in this outcome with a payoff of 5. And so that's not profitable deviation either. So neither player has a profitable deviation, and by definition it's a Nash equilibrium. But there's something a little disturbing about this equilibrium. Let's clear the slide so it's a little less messy, and let's again write down the strategy for player 1, going B, H. And let's focus on this node right there. Why would player 1 actually do H? Because G dominates it. In G they get a payoff of 2 rather than 1. And so even though it did lead to a Nash equilibrium, there's something a little troubling about it. And the way to understand it is by claiming that they would go down H here. Player 1 is threatening player 2 and telling him, listen, do not consider going down here because I'm going to go down here, therefore, and you would get a 0, so you'd better go here and get a 5, is what player 1 is saying to player 2. But this threat is not credible, because after all, player 2 said, player 1 says that, but in fact, it would not be in their interest, so I believe that player 1 actually would go down here. And so, how do we capture this in a formal definition? That brings us to the notion of subgame perfect equilibria, or subgame perfection. So let's first define a subgame. It's a very obvious notion. Looking at some node in the game, node H, the subgame of G rooted at H is a restriction of H to the descendants from that node. And similarly, what are the set of all subgames of G? Well, look at all the nodes in G, and the set of all subgames is simply all the subgames rooted at some node in G. And so a Nash equilibrium is a subgame perfect if its restriction to every subgame is also a Nash equilibrium for that subgame. So if, for example, we go to the previous slide and we consider, again, clearing the slide for a second, and if we look at the Nash equilibrium BH CE, and we just saw it's a Nash equilibrium, but among the subgames of this game, the subtrees of this this tree is this subtree. So here's a subgame. It's a game of a single player, player 1, and the restriction of this Nash equilibrium is simply that action of going H, but this is not an equilibrium in this very simple tree because there's a profitable deviation to G for the player. And so while it's a Nash equilibrium of the whole tree, its restriction to the subtree here is not a Nash equilibrium, and therefore this Nash equilibrium is not a subgame perfect. And so we see that in fact that captures the intuition of non-credible threat, and notice also that one special case of a subtree is the entire tree. So subgame perfect equilibrium has got to also be a Nash equilibrium. So let's test our understanding of this concept a little bit. Let's look at this tree and ask ourselves what are some of the subgame perfect equilibria there. For example, how about AGCF? Well, the claim is this, in fact, is subgame perfect. Now, why is that? What is A, G, C, and F? So that gives you this outcome over here, and you can check there's no profitable deviation. But you can also ask, in all the subgames, is there a profitable deviation? Well, let's look at some of the subgames. Well, for example, here there is this deviation over here, but that would not be profitable for player 2 because they would go down from 8 to 3. How about over here? Is there profitable deviation, for example, to player 2? Not really, because if they deviated over here, they would end up with a 5 rather than the 10 they're getting. How about over here? Is there profitable deviation at this node to the agent 1? Well, no, because if they deviate, they would get 1 rather than 2. So in all subgames, the restriction of the strategy profile to that subgame is still a Nash equilibrium, and AGCF is in fact a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium. How about BHCE? Well, the claim is that it's not. Well, let's first write down the strategy. BH, and CE. And this is not subgame perfect for the reasons we saw before. We saw that in this subgame right here, there is a profitable deviation for player 1, namely to deviate over here and get 2 rather than 1. And so it's not subgame perfect. And in fact, for the same reason, AHCF will not be subgame perfect. Let's write down what AHCF is. AHCF. You can check that it's a Nash equilibrium, but it is not subgame perfect. Again, this subgame here allows for a profitable deviation on the part of the player 1. So even though it's what's called off path, even though player 1 makes sure that he never gets to visit this node by going down here, even so it's not subgame perfect, because had he gotten here, he would not have done what he claims he would have done. And that gives us a good sense for what a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium is.